Okay, we're going to get started today. Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. You just joined She Can Code's live webinar called Male Allies, How to Find Them and the Role They Play. I'm your host for today, Kayla Bushweiler, the Managing Director, Community and Partnerships at She Can Code. For those tuning in who aren't familiar with us, She Can Code is a collaborative community working together to tackle the tech gender gap. You can join our community platform to find a supportive network of like-minded individuals, new opportunities and guidance to help you to excel in your career. Before I introduce our wonderful speakers for today, please note that we have a Q&A running throughout. It's a live Q&A session, so please submit your questions throughout this webinar and we will try and get to them at the end. So I'm going to kick off with my incredible guests for today. I'm very excited to introduce them. On the panel today, we have Kayla Bushweiler, Lead Data Engineer at Quantexa. We have Robin Bradley, CEO of bigspark. We also have Phil Race, CEO of Totalmobile, and Alex Ford, CRO at Encompass. Welcome, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here today. We're going to do some introductions first, so our attendees know who you are. Kayla, can we start with you, if that's okay?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I'm a lead data engineer here at Quantexa, also a technical lead, kind of leading delivery of our projects that we have going on. I've been here just over 5 years. My background's originally in physics, but kind of slowly transitioned it into tech kind of a little bit later on. But yeah.
Amazing. And Robin, yourself?
Hi, Robin Bradley, CEO of bigspark. bigspark's a data and AI engineering consultancy. Only been going about 4 or 5 years, grown really quickly. One of the Sunday Times top 100 growth companies this year, mainly in financial services, but try and do really cool and innovative things for our customers in the data and AI space.
And Phil?
Hi there. Lovely to be on this panel. Thanks for the invitation. Phil Race, I'm the CEO of Totalmobile. We are specialists in providing software solutions on a SaaS platform to the field services marketplace. Bit of an interesting one. Our technology is used by all of the every drivers, delivering over 4 million parcels a day at the moment. So my team are Father Christmas.
Oh, I love that. And Alex, last but not least.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to take part today. I'm Alex Ford. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Encompass. Our technology is used by leading global banks, particularly in their C&IB divisions, where they use Encompass to produce a corporate digital identity that really transforms the onboarding and review experience to provide benefits in terms of client experience and also their profit models. So thanks for having us today.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for all of you for joining us. I'm so pleased that we have a balanced panel as well for this discussion, which is nice to have 2 guys and 2 females to add to this discussion today. We have a lot to get through, so we're going to kick off with our first question. Kayla, I'd love to start with you. How do you personally define male allyship in the workplace, and what are some practical examples you've seen or even implemented that have had a meaningful impact on gender equality?
Yeah, good question. So I guess as with anything, like allies and advocates are kind of present to support the underrepresented voices to be heard. And I know that we've made loads of progress with getting girls and women involved in tech and STEM in particular, which is incredible. But there's always still work to be done. I realized that women in tech is just a small intersection of like kind of our underrepresented voices that we have. But one of the things that I've found kind of most powerful, at least on my limited journey so far, is just advocacy and amplification. I've had a lot of really wonderful coworkers and mentorship throughout both like school and my career that have just supported ideas, ensuring that contributions are heard anything that we notice that there's kind of an imbalance in things, just speaking up about it. A lot of allyship doesn't necessarily have to be anything kind of fancy or outside of the norm. It's just if you see something, say something. And if you find areas where you think that maybe somebody would be well suited to contribute, but might not be as keen to put themselves forward, as with anyone, maybe in this instance, it's for women specifically, but suggest, encourage, like offer support. There are things that we should be doing for everybody, but especially when we have like disparate sort of representation, just looking for ways to boost that. I also think that this is quite important because, as I think most people kind of tend to be, well, maybe not true, but a lot of folks tend to be high achievers and then they're like fierce competitors in everything that you do. If you want a true competition that you can be proud of, or kind of anything like in the workplace, celebrating your wins, that is all the more meaningful and powerful if you know that you've gotten there in the most equitable way possible and that all of the outcomes are based on a true meritocracy, which is what I think this really helps to foster.
Yes, definitely. I love the fact that you said it doesn't have to be fancy or anything outside of the norm. And you're absolutely right. And Phil, I could see you nodding along as Kayla said it, because actually it doesn't have to be, does it? It's the tiniest things sometimes. It doesn't have to be a big male allyship program that we all take part in.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's we will succeed here with lots of small changes, I think, rather than big campaigns. And education, I think, also is very important for all concerned. This understanding and being conscious of discrimination and unconscious discrimination. You just sometimes don't realise you're doing it. It's just one of those things. So education, I think, is really really useful. We within the Beaumont group of private equity owned companies ran our Women in Leadership program this year. So it wasn't a big, massive exercise, but we were paired up with some women in other companies in the portfolio. And as part of that, we were educated. There was some training given to people like myself, and it made you realise how very subtle, unconscious bias was rife. And when you're educated and you go through some of that awareness, it becomes very vivid. So yeah, it's not grand things. Lots and lots of little changes, I think, will help us succeed.
Yeah, I love that. Yes, the education side. I think some men that I've spoken to in the past have said, you know what, it's kind of I feel like I'm being dragged in a room and being told things that I can and cannot say. And actually, that's not what the education part is about. It's actually just pointing out some things that you might not even realize that you're doing, and just being willing to say, actually, I didn't realize I did that, or certain words that we use that we don't realize we maybe shouldn't be using in meetings. But right, it's not a case of these are things you shouldn't be doing these things. It's more how can we help everybody?
Yeah, I think having it, being willing to have a very open conversation about all of these things, whether it's sexual bias or racial bias, these things should be talked about. I mean, you shouldn't be afraid of having the conversation and confronting it. And people sometimes shy away because they're a bit nervous about, have I used the right phrase or the right word? Or that's not really the issue. The issue is, is there unconscious bias or even conscious bias? How do you address that? And there are ways you can address that. But having that freedom to have a conversation, I think, is the start point for the whole journey. And I'd like to hope we encourage that in Totalmobile.
Yeah. Oh, Robin, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, Kaylee. It's interesting on that because it's about building that environment, isn't it, of trust as well. So being really supportive and enabling those conversations to happen. And when I was thinking about some of the core values was around being true and honest yourself and open. And then trying to be fair, across everything. So equality across all the different sort of genres we're talking about, I think sets that tone as a leader in your organization to then enable you to have those conversations. And the other thing that that I thought that was interesting that Kaylee talked about was nearly a space, giving space and time to women to speak and be heard as well, I think is important, and something that I've learned over time, which maybe for alpha males, when they're trying to clog the airways in meetings, and I've just done it and jumped in, but giving that space to people and women to be able to speak and be heard and actively listen, like Phil said. I think in our management team meeting, and interestingly, we've got 5 out of 6 of my management team are really high-flying women, which is amazing. I've purposely set it up so we've each got time to speak, and we've got a structure in place to enable them to be heard and to talk about what they're doing and their achievements, and talk about successes as well. So actively talk about that as a team.
Yeah, and you're right. I think it's knowing as well, like when to jump in. You're on a panel, so you're going to jump in, but you're right, giving that space in meetings. I think some of that changed as well when we started to move to hybrid working and having Zoom meetings, and I found that the structure of meetings changed, and if you were working with people that were a bit nervous or didn't want to jump in, you had the ability to raise a hand on Zoom, and all of those things were quite different than being in the office and being physically in the room with lots of people. It kind of changed the dynamic of how we interact with each other at work, and I felt that I could have more of a voice sometimes on Zoom meetings than I could actually in the office, because you're there and you have your own square and you can share what you want to share. Alex, I can see you smiling away. Is that something that you had experienced, or how do you personally define male allyship?
I just like that concept, actually, of like everyone gets their own square. I think that's a nice.
Right, you all have your own space.
Metaphor for having an equal part of the frame, literally on the screen, right? It's like a physical demarcation of the equality. It's a nice turn of phrase. I did notice that as well, and the etiquettes around participation and people being more inclined to, observe even the order that the hands went up and respect that. And it does change the way the dialogue occurs, probably gives more people access to the conversation, definitely.
Yeah, I think COVID changed quite a lot for everybody in the working environments that we're in every day. I wanted to ask a little bit about strategies and approaches to this. So what strategies or approaches would you recommend for male allies to effectively change bias and stereotypes in professional settings without fear of backlash or missteps? Robin, should we start with you on that one? It is people are going to have that fear. Do they want to step forward as a male ally? Do we have any strategies for that?
Look, I think we touched on it a little bit about being true and honest and having your values. Equality is a big thing for me, and setting that tone from the top. I think enabling equality to happen as well. So one of the things at bigspark we've looked at is returners to work, which is a big thing. So anyone that's taken a career break, but especially sort of maybe looking at women that have taken career breaks, and how can we enable them to be successful when they return to work, and look at a process around that, a support network, an ability and an appreciation that they might need retraining. We're similar to Kayla, we're in the tech industry, so things do change quickly, but so do they need upskilling or retraining, let's say, and allowing them time and accepting that is part of a process. And I suppose that falls back into or aligns to, say, maternity or paternity cover. So it can be male or female, but accommodating that with processes and time and to get back up to speed. And then the big one, I suppose the big one for bigspark, and we are fully remote, so this remote working has been an interesting challenge from day one, but flexibility, I think, is important across society now. especially for women. If I look at our leadership team, a couple of the women in our management team have flexible working hours, but it's a trust thing as well. You know, I really trust like everyone in my organization, you know, but including women that work flexibly or anyone that works flexibly, that they will do their job, you know, to a high level.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important.
Yeah, that trust, as you touched upon it there, it comes from the top as well, and it has to trickle down, because if people can't see that from the top down, then it's not going to be in the other levels in your company. But you're right, and almost that trust as well to speak up, that you are allowed to speak up and point things out and say, you know, even if it's not criticizing somebody, but just saying, you know, I was in a meeting and this didn't seem right, or speaking up for, like you said earlier about, you know, ladies having the time to speak in meetings and being able to just step in and say, actually, can we hear what so-and-so needs to say? Or Phil, you're saying about those biases. I spoke with a guy who he's very senior in tech, and his wife is very senior in tech. And he said to me, she was in a meeting years ago where every time they got to that meeting, because she was on the board, they would always ask her to take the minutes. And someone else in the room pointed out that even though she was just willingly going, yeah, you know, going to do the minutes, it's fine. And so it was a male colleague who pointed out, actually, maybe we could switch this and rotate who takes the minutes every meeting instead of this lady having to do it. But nobody was doing it as in, you're the woman, you have to take the minutes. It was just happening. But it was somebody that was trusted, you know, trust the environment that they were in. They knew they could speak up, and they knew they could just say, hey, has anyone noticed that the only lady in the room on board is doing it?
But they're the little things that we really need to change, don't we? Because that is effectively an unconscious bias, isn't it? It's like, oh, that's the PA in the room is going to take the minutes, and it's just so wrong. It is so wrong, and to have the freedom to call that out and go, no, this isn't right, I think is so important. And having that, I think Robin's phrase, I think was great. I think as a CEO, we set what is acceptable behaviour. So as a CEO, what we do, if we do it correctly, then we set an appropriate behaviour and then the conditions for the rest of the organisation. Another really subtle thing is the order of an agenda. So our chief people officer, I've got two brilliant female. I've got a brilliant board, full stop. But I've got two brilliant females on the board, and one of the key things for us, the chief people and places officer, we make sure that she's just not the last person on the agenda. You know, we talk about revenue and finances and sales and all of these wonderful things, but actually people is a crucial part of our business. So we mix the agenda around at each board meeting. So we take it in turns as to who goes first and who goes last. And that is just so important, those sort of things, so that people feel that they deserve to be in the room, they deserve to be heard, they deserve that space, and there is no hierarchy. And I think that is, you know, subtle things like just switching the agenda around all helps address that imbalance. And as I say, lots and lots of small changes.
Yeah, that's such a good point. You're right, because you might not notice that as well, that you might always be the last person on the list, and you might think by then people have shut off, they're not going to listen to me because I'm the last person, I'm the last point on the agenda. So you're right, just that's just being mindful of how that last person is always going to feel on the list, and just making sure that that's a really good idea to change it up. So everybody feels, again, with that environment of trust as well, that everybody is respected and has their space and their time.
I think another thing you can do is look for patterns in, you know, look at the data in your organization. If there's one area where, you know, the gender balance or other, you know, dimensions for diversity don't reflect the general population, then you have to say that something else is going on there, right? Statistically, you know, why is it the case that this circumstance or team within our organization has a different makeup, you know, it's unlikely inherently the case that that group is just naturally better at whatever the team, you know, or skill that team demands. There's probably something else going on, and it would, you know, be a good clue to go and look more closely at that area and say, why are there more of ABC or XYZ in this population or this group, and what is at play here that helps
That
us
also,
understand.
it also takes a company to a good company to have that thought as well. Let's go and look at the patterns in our company, because we sometimes you get bogged down in the day-to-day, and not all companies are taking that moment to step back and think, actually, how are we made up as a company? And we work with a corporate ambassador. They work in retail, and they said they're working with us, obviously because of women in tech, but they said, you know what, in terms of retail, we look at all of our teams right across the board, because you'll get lots of men on the tech team, and then you'll get lots of female on the buying team and the retail side of things. So they said, we're actually trying to find those patterns and make sure that we try and balance all teams, not just the tech teams, because you are right, there are certain pockets of organizations where there is an imbalance, and it takes a company, a good company, to just, you know, step back and say, let's just actually look at this and see why that's happening, and whether we can change things. Definitely.
I think one of the other ones as well is pay, isn't it? I think, Kaylee, if we're not shying away from it and making sure you're very equitable in that space. BigSpark, we do an annual pay review, and you know, it's a meritocracy. You know, our highest paid employee is a woman. You know, in different ranks, we've got women that are the highest in their bands. It's very much a meritocracy, and it doesn't even come into well, I was going to say it doesn't come into the equation. I suppose myself and the head of people look proactively to make sure that we are fair, because we have this, you know, we really want to be fair and make sure we aren't discriminating. So we go over and above, I suppose, to make sure we are fair. But as long as we feel, well, we go through and check that we're fair, then it is just meritocracy. And I think that's the main thing, because that's what everyone wants.
Yeah, Kayla, I can see you nodding along at that with the pay question there.
Yeah, honestly, I agree with everything everyone has said so far. I know at Quantexa we kind of do a pay kind of analysis each year, and send out a survey kind of around identifying our areas of diversity and how well people are being supported. So that's been really wonderful to see our people team kind of taking that on year after year. And then kind of along what you like Phil, Alex were alluding to earlier, I read a really wonderful HBR article a few months back around, I think it was called like, for women and minorities to get ahead, managers must assign work fairly. And it was talking a lot about kind of the allocation of maybe glamour work that gets you noticed by higher ups, gives you the opportunity to kind of really stretch yourself and challenge yourself and lead you into your next promotion or whatever that might be, like that kind of springboard opportunity. And then the office housework, the things that are critical to keeping the company functioning, but tend to get picked up by people who might do it well or quick or just see a need, fill a need. And it doesn't always have to be women, but it kind of can be a lot of times. It seems like there is like at least some evidence that we trend towards that, maybe because we just have, I don't know, are kind of conditioned in childhood to look around for these things. It's obviously not everyone, but it's just quite interesting thing to think about. Like you guys have all said about rotating who's handling certain kinds of responsibilities, making sure that everyone has the opportunity for that sort of glamour work. If you see somebody who is capable that might not like advocate for themselves, doing that for them, whether they're male or female, but also encouraging women to kind of put themselves forward for the things that they might not. And then I guess my last comment is, while I agree kind of with what Robin had said earlier about these kinds of mentalities kind of coming from the top down, and the CEOs like him and Phil leading by example, I think it's quite important to remember that everyone owns culture. Every single person at the company plays a role in both creating and reinforcing the culture of your company. So having very clear values, very clear expectations, obviously leading by example, but making that obviously safe space that you all have mentioned individually, that makes it easy and comfortable for people to speak up without fear of retribution. That all comes from the culture, and that's all something that each and every one of our kind of members of our company can influence directly. And the goal is just that anything that's maybe conscious or unconscious, it's easy to say something about things. For any of those harder problems, it's not everyone's responsibility to challenge directly. Like if you don't kind of feel comfortable or safe, that's completely reasonable. That's why we have HR and people teams and different mechanisms to kind of comfortably or anonymously raise things that you see. So taking advantage of like those channels and just using it to not let opportunities to kind of do the right thing for the sake of it being the right thing kind of pass you by.
Yeah. Yeah, Kayla, was it you recently? We were speaking about glue work. Was that you? I was talking to a lady recently. You're looking at me puzzled. It wasn't you, Kayla. There was a lady. You literally just said what another lady said to me. It was about when you do allocate work, just to be mindful as to who you're allocating that work to, because the conversation I had with this lady was about glue work. So she said a lot of ladies in companies don't realize they're not actually in a proper role. They do the glue of everybody else's roles. And when that comes around to being promoted, you'll find yourself in this weird position where nobody actually knows how to promote you because you're not in a proper role, but you're doing the bits of everybody else's role because we couldn't cope without you because you're the glue. But I remember this lady said to me, just being mindful of when you do give work to people, making sure that especially the females tend to drop into those glue work roles, and being mindful that you're giving work to people with proper roles, that when they can actually go for a promotion, there is a clear path for them, instead of that lady floating around in a role that she just eventually thinks, I'm just going to have to leave because I can't see a path forward. So you're right, it's great that you brought that up of who you allocate work to, and why, just being mindful as well as to why you might be doing that, if there are any biases there.
There's some research I read as part of this Women in Leadership program, was talking about, well, there's two really fascinating ones. One was imposter syndrome, and they were saying that females, you can't help but genericize in these sort of conversations, but females typically feel imposter syndrome more than males, and it's, you know, that we all feel it. It's just maybe the men sort of hide it away and have a bit more confidence. So that was one, and the second one I thought was really interesting was women typically feel they have to know 80–90% of the role to put themselves forward as a candidate for particular situations, whereas men typically the percentage is a lot less. You know, they're willing to have a go, and therefore they'll put themselves forward even though they may not actually know the 80% that a woman will be able to do, but they're willing to put themselves forward in situations of uncertainty. So as a leader, our duty then is to encourage people to put themselves forward, even if they don't feel they know it all, and actually they may be the better candidate, and it's just that they're holding themselves back from putting themselves forward, and so we can help that by encouraging people to put themselves forward, even though they might not feel they know as much as their colleagues. So again, these little nuances, once you're aware of it, you absolutely spot it. It's really interesting, and you can have that conversation in a very straightforward way.
Yes, I've had that before. You're so right. It is kind of that ask for forgiveness later if you've applied for something and you think, oh God, actually I can't.
I've done it.
Yeah. So you're right, but it's picking up on that, or just knowing that there might be someone on your team who is doing all of those things and perhaps hasn't put herself forward, but you know she's doing those things anyway, and that she would be great for that role, and might just need a bit of a nudge to say,
Absolutely.
put yourself
Yeah.
forward for this. On that note, Phil, what about steps that organisations can take? So what steps can they take to create an environment where male allyship is encouraged and celebrated rather than treated as an exception or an optional behaviour?
Well, we do mentorship anyway, so I think it's just extending that mentorship program so people can create those formal or informal connections across the business. So that's something you can always encourage. We actually have there's a female leaders forum within the business. It's actually it's nothing that the CEO sponsors. That they've done this themselves to give themselves again a space, a conversation, to keep this alive for that particular group, and we're delighted to encourage that. And we also this year we've run a couple of lunch and learns and panels where we've actually talked about allyship and mentorship and safe spaces and discrimination. We've actually had those conversations in an open forum where myself and some of my fellow leadership team have had very, very open conversations, not dissimilar to this. You'd be a great host of one of those panels, I'm sure. It was to just put this subject right in the forefront and go, this is a subject we should talk about. So I think there are definitely some tools and techniques we can use.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. It's talking about it, because we host something called Power Hours with some of our corporate ambassadors, and the one that we went to recently, we basically just turn up, we cake, and we chat to women in tech, and it's super fun to meet everybody and introduce them to our community. But the one we were at recently with one of our corporate ambassadors, there were men there, and they wanted to turn up and just show their support for the female software engineers that were in the room, and they wanted to get involved as male allies and see how they could help. And that we had a small round table, and it was nice to have different opinions at the table and how it affects different people on the tech team. But it was so refreshing to have guys turn up and actually want to be part of that conversation. And it's something we've said for years, that we can't do this and we can't move forward without those male voices in the room. And it's refreshing to see now that more and more men are stepping forward and saying, actually this was something I was doing anyway. If we I've always been like that, and if we want to call it male allyship, then that's fair enough. But a lot of men have already been doing that within their companies anyway. It's now almost has a label to it. So
there's another one. Sorry to dominate. I don't want to. The other lesson was about networking. So men are typically better at creating their networks, and women are not. Again, really, apologies for the generic sort of extreme view, but you have to have that conversation, right? And I was and so the advice that we were given to encourage everyone and across the business is to think of your personal boardroom. And I thought that was a brilliant phrase. So just think about all those allies, those individuals around you that you can bounce ideas off in a safe way. You can have those conversations. You can talk about career. You can talk about the industry or whatever. And that personal boardroom, and that really resonated with me as a concept. So that would be something I'd encourage everyone to do. I do it. I didn't realise it was my personal boredom. Didn't realise that's what it was. But I thought it was a great way of visualising all of those allies that you should encourage to help you with your career.
Yeah, and they're not always in your current company either. I found that I've had some brilliant male sponsors in the past who are the people that have said the right things about me when I'm not in the room, and a lot of them have been male sponsors, and they're the people that have got me promoted and they've put me forward for projects, and a lot of those that I would now call male allies and sponsors, they're from previous jobs that, you know, we're still in contact, and they're people that personal boardroom stretches across different companies as well. So you're right, it's how to piece together who is in your personal boardroom, because they're not always at your current company either.
Absolutely.
I can see so many nodding heads, Kayla.
Yeah, I quite agree. Like I said, like I think a lot of this comes back to culture, and that comes down to the individual. But one of the ways that I think like companies can foster this is setting allyship, not just for women, but today's case for women as a core value for your company. Like kind of tying it to whatever existing DEI programs or strategies you already have is quite important. Like it gets visibility, and it also sets the expectation that if you're going to succeed here, this is something that we want you to be doing, that we need you to be doing. And we have loads of research, like against having greater diversity and greater kind of feelings of inclusion across any kind of groups that we have in our workplace leads to better business outcomes. Like there is a strong business case for having a good DEI strategy and having women in leadership positions or kind of feeling empowered and comfortable in their work environments. The more diversity that we have in our thinking, in the way that we approach problems, the better outcomes we get for our business and for our clients and partners. So it's really important both from like a people standpoint, but also from the profit standpoint for everyone's kind of business. I think like Robin mentioned it earlier, but training is also quite useful. We've done unconscious bias training as part of like our mandatory training that we have. So kind of like having similar things to that, I think brings it to the forefront of everyone's mind. And it just offers a quick refresher that's not kind of calling anyone out, but just reminding that these are things to kind of be aware of. And I think as you see information more often, or you start kind of being surrounded by it or consuming it on a more regular basis, it switches into things that become a bit more intuitive. And I think that's sort of the goal for this overall. Like these should be behaviors you don't even have to think about. Like it just kind of happens off the cuff when you notice something or you see an opportunity that can be grasped. You just take advantage of it by default because that's what you've made your culture be. That's what people are used to doing. So I think that's kind of the end goal.
Yeah, I love that you said business outcomes, because years ago that used to be diversity used to be a nice to have. And I remember when I started covering that years ago as a reporter, it was one of those things. It was like, oh, it's a nice to have, nobody's really talking about it. And then I think it was McKinsey that released a report about if you had one woman on your board, what that can do to your bottom line. And all companies, their ears pricked up and they went, well, it can actually increase our profit if we have a woman on the board. So suddenly it becomes not a nice to have, but actually business outcomes are improved by having a diverse team and all of the benefits that come with that. And it did take a little while for people to stop talking about diversity as a nice to have and seeing it as actually it really does make an impact on your business, not just on the culture and the environment, but also on business outcomes and profit as well. So thankfully we are getting there on that one. Alex, I wanted to ask you, how can men and women work more collaboratively to identify barriers to progress and implement solutions that accelerate gender equality, particularly in leadership roles?
Thanks. Yeah, I think on that one, you know, talking about topics of equality in the workplace, I always find it hard to look past the kind of structural issues that have led to this, you know, the split we have today, I suppose. And one of the biggest issues in that domain is parental leave. And I really think access to parental leave for men and women, you know, and importantly, you know, making it acceptable and normal for fathers to use the parental leave that is provided, or making sure there's a scheme there that they can access so that dads can play a really active role equal role in caring. And likewise, I suppose looking the other way in terms of caring for maybe dependent adults in the broader family unit as well, parents or others. Again, sharing the role of caring and making that more socially acceptable. When we allow men to take up that position in society, it means that women are sharing the load and can therefore play a bigger role in the way they organise their participation in the workforce too. And we're all coming from tech companies, which I think as well, if you're talking about structural stuff, probably have to acknowledge that compared to other industries or roles, we probably have a greater opportunity to access some of these schemes and setups. There's not all industries and job types where it is practical, but in tech mostly we do have that position, and mostly in terms of education and the types of roles we're doing and access to the programs that we have, that's probably an industry where we could really lead the way, I think.
Yes, definitely. Robin, I can see you nodding along with the parental leave there. You're right, it's something that is we're getting better at, but still at least it's there as an option now. But yeah, I completely agree with that, Alex, on almost making that a bit more balanced. Robin, you're nodding along.
Yeah. It was one of the first things that I did with Gail, who was my great head of people, looking at parental leave and making sure it was fair. I spoke to a few senior women within the organization, and actually spoke to my wife before the call, and she was like, well, it's pay, isn't it? Which we've already talked about, inequality there, like maternity leave and paternity leave and being fair. And then, I'm passionate about that returning to work as well. So it links to maternity and supporting people when they return to work, whatever stage of their career, I think is important as well. And actually you can get some great people. Like, it's not just maternity, it's from a cultural standpoint, different cultures, they might take time off as women during their life. People take career breaks, go traveling, and building a process and a structure around supporting them to come back and accommodating that. Like I said, in tech, you've got to retrain in some ways and have a structure and training plan around it and feel supported to do that, and space and time to do it. It's important. So
yeah. We spoke a lot today about that having that trust and that space to be able to speak up and point things out when you need to. I've actually, just speaking about pay there, someone has dropped in a question. Speaking of pay, it says, I know I earn more than the woman on my team who is doing a fairly similar role. Is there a way I can advocate for a pay rise for her without everything kicking off, as technically we're not supposed to discuss pay? I suppose that does come down to that environment though. Do you feel you can trust your team? If you were to go to somebody above you and talk about that, are there any tips for that, do you think? How can you advocate for a woman on your team if you think she deserves a pay rise?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. I would sort of argue, be careful not to speak on other people's behalf, but that may be a bit awkward. So you might want to clear it with that individual first. But again, I think more generally, legislation is driving us to look at this and inspect this area. Gender pay gap reporting is now an obligation that we have as a business. So we are examining and looking at the inequalities in pay, and it's our duty as leaders to address those inequalities. So there is legislation helping this conversation anyway. But I think in general, whether it's pay or advocating individuals in a business, that is always a good thing. This person is doing a great job. Just want to let you know.
Yeah.
You might want to think about it. That's a great conversation to have. So I think it's about not hiding that one away and making that a very public thing. Just be a little bit careful about crossing the line. Just got to watch that one, because you might be creating a disturbance. But it's a conversation that you should be able to have about advocating people. That is absolutely something I'd encourage.
Yeah, definitely. It's a tough one as well, because someone else has said in here something similar about rocking the boat. It is a topic where you walk a fine line as to whether to say anything or not, or being in the right environment to say something, and who you can trust to say something to. And because somebody else has put in here, thanks for hosting this webinar. I just want to ask this question, as my manager does not believe gender bias is an issue because he's never personally experienced it. Is there a way I can approach him to increase his awareness without rocking the boat? Again, another touchy, how do you
Well, I think on each of these things, like, don't always have to be touchy. Like with the pay bit, like that, I think like you could even use this webinar as a good jumping off point. Like as a hypothetical, like I went to this webinar about kind of, male allyship in the workplace, and I was wondering if we have any systems in place to ensure that we have equal pay between genders at the company, and if not, if that's something that we're looking into doing. Like you can just start it off with like something that's objectively true and use it like as a kind of point to like get to this systematic like route of setting up checks and balances to ensure that like situations like that don't occur going forward. And then for the manager bit, like I think for these conversations and for any kind of weird workplace things that like you encounter, it's generally best to come at it from the point that most like just assume the best unless somebody really gives you a reason to, like just assume they're a decent human capable of empathy and they just want to have a nice life, pay their bills, spend time with their loved ones, do something fulfilling with like their job that they have to pay the bills, and like their world context, their dogma that they've grown up around shapes how they interact with the world, and everyone's is different, but it's coming from a point of not that like you've got the wrong mindset or you don't understand like what's going on. Like these are some things that like maybe I feel or I notice, or here's a really great article that I read. I thought maybe this would be interesting to you. Let me know what you think. Like if you're kind of having that open conversation that's not attacking somebody's character, assuming the best of them, assuming they want to be a good person, they want to grow, they want to improve the same as you do, you'll probably have a decent outcome. And if you don't, then you can kind of step back and be like, sorry, I realize we're kind of like, experiencing a bit of friction or discontent here. I wanted to be clear that my intention what kind of wasn't that. It was simply to maybe raise something that I'm feeling, like leverage those I statements and just kind of come at it from the positive angle, assuming the best.
Yeah.
I think that feeling, like talking about your feelings and how you feel in situations, is really powerful. To me, something I've reflected on and has had to actively listen to women talking to me, I suppose, as a leader. And I don't know how other people feel unless they tell me, I think that's quite a powerful thing to approach a manager around and go, look, I'm just feeling a bit undervalued, or talking about how you feel in a certain situation is important. And obviously that safe space and being comfortable to do it is something we talked about earlier. And then the pay as well, I think championing your female colleagues and their achievements is something that I think is really powerful as well. I know it's a big thing that we try and do, and making sure that you champion on their behalf maybe and say, look, she's done this, it's amazing, this project went really well, they were brilliant at this, and promoting them within your team is a thing that can be really powerful as well. If you don't want to have that with pay conversation, you sort of emphasize how brilliant they've been at doing certain tasks or projects or delivering certain things. That's a really nice thing to do. Not even nice, powerful thing to do as well.
Definitely. And that actually brings us back to the beginning of our conversation with Kayla, you mentioning the smaller things, just the normal things that you can do. They're not always big gestures, they're tiny things. And Robin, you just saying that it made me think of, for instance, nominating ladies on your team for awards, because for our awards we were amazed that some companies we speak to, they don't want to celebrate their ladies because they don't want to let other people know that they've got amazing ladies at their company. And we're like, this is beyond us. Celebrate your ladies. And if you're a male ally, nominate a team member and say, you know what, she's doing amazing things. She should win an award for the things that she's been doing. So even the tiniest things there, like nominating somebody, even if it's anonymous, can make such a difference to somebody and can really lift that lady as well in her confidence if she does have imposter syndrome and she thinks, amazing, somebody put me forward for that. But like we said at the start, it's not always the big things, and it's not always even speaking up in meetings in defense of somebody or, you know, pointing things out. It can be the really tiny things that can really help. We are out of time. I could keep talking to you all for another hour on this, but we are already out of time, I'm afraid. So Robin, Kayla, Alex, Phil, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you all. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And
Really enjoyed it.
everybody who joined us, as always, thank you so much for joining us. This session is recorded, so we will put it up on She Can Code blog tomorrow. If you haven't already joined our community, please go over and join our community. We have just over 4,500 ladies in there, real women in tech, who are all connecting, and we cannot see the direct messages. They are encrypted, but there are hundreds of direct messages sent daily amongst our ladies. So please go over to community.shecancode.io, sign up, find your next opportunity, find other people, find male allies. We have lots of male allies who are mentors. They are part of our mentoring program as well. So if you do want to hop over and join our mentoring program or find yourself a mentor, please do so. But for everybody watching, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us for our last webinar of the year. We have 6 others lined up for next year that we're excited about, so we hope to see you on those. But to our panel, thank you so much, and we will see you all in the new year. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.